Picture this. You're standing at the gates of the most exclusive royal event of the century, dressed in your finest clothes, holding an invitation that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Security guards scan your face, check their lists, and then deliver the words that shatter your world completely. I'm sorry, but your name isn't on the approved list. Now imagine that person is Camilla Parker Bowles, and those gates belong to the royal family she desperately wants to join. This isn't just any rejection. It's a public humiliation that will echo through the halls of Buckingham Palace for decades to come. What happens when love meets an institution that has stood for over 1,000 years? What price does a woman pay when she dares to love a future king? And, most importantly, how far will the royal family go to protect their bloodline from what they see as an unwelcome intrusion? This is the untold story of Camilla's fight for acceptance, a battle that would reshape the British monarchy forever. It's a tale of forbidden love, family betrayal, public shame, and ultimate triumph that reads like a modern fairy tale. Except the dragons are real, and they wear crowns. The summer rain drummed against the windows of the exclusive London club where Camilla Rosemary Shand first laid eyes on Prince Charles in 1970. She was 23, confident, and completely unaware that this moment would define the rest of her life. Charles, 22, and fresh from his studies, was immediately drawn to her wit and intelligence. Their first conversation lasted hours, filled with laughter about horses, literature, and the absurdities of high society. Camilla came from aristocratic stock, but not royal blood. Her father, Bruce Shand, was a decorated war hero and wine merchant. Her mother, Rosalind, was the daughter of a baron. The Shand family moved in upper-class circles, but they were outsiders looking into the golden cage of royalty. Camilla grew up riding horses in the countryside, attending the finest schools, and learning the art of conversation that would later captivate a future king. Their romance bloomed quickly during that magical summer. Charles found in Camilla something he had never experienced before: genuine companionship without the suffocating protocol that surrounded his every move. She treated him like a man, not a prince. She challenged his thoughts, shared his passions, and offered him the normalcy he desperately craved. For Camilla, Charles represented adventure and a love story that seemed destined by fate. They spent countless afternoons together, riding through Windsor Great Park, sharing picnics by the Thames, and attending private gatherings where they could simply be themselves. Charles would later describe this period as the happiest of his young life. Camilla introduced him to her world of hunting weekends and country house parties, where conversation flowed as freely as the wine, and laughter echoed through ancient halls. But even in those early days, shadows loomed over their happiness. The royal family watched Charles's every move with the intensity of hawks protecting their territory. They had already mapped out his future, and it did not include a relationship with someone they considered unsuitable. The palace machinery, a complex web of advisors, courtiers, and family members, began to whisper concerns about the inappropriateness of the match. Queen Elizabeth, Charles's mother, maintained her characteristic silence on the matter, but her disapproval was palpable in every formal gathering where Camilla's name might arise. The Queen Mother, however, was far more vocal in her opposition. She remembered the chaos that had surrounded her own family when Edward VIII abdicated for love, and she was determined that history would not repeat itself. Prince Philip, Charles's father, approached the situation with his typical bluntness. During one particularly tense family dinner, he allegedly told Charles that while Camilla might be suitable for fun, she was certainly not suitable for marriage. The comment struck Charles like a physical blow, highlighting the vast chasm between his personal desires and his royal duties. The pressure intensified when Charles was sent on a naval deployment to the Caribbean in early 1973. The separation was intended to cool the romance, but it had the opposite effect on Charles's heart, even as it provided the royal family with the opportunity they needed. While Charles sailed distant seas, writing passionate letters to Camilla that would never reach her, the palace worked behind the scenes to ensure their relationship would not survive his absence. During Charles's deployment, Camilla found herself increasingly isolated from royal circles. Invitations to events dried up, mutual friends became distant, and she began to understand the true power of royal disapproval. The message was clear: she was not welcome in their world, and any future with Charles was impossible as long as the family maintained their opposition. It was during this vulnerable period that Andrew Parker Bowles re-entered Camilla's life. Andrew was a cavalry officer, handsome and charming, from an old Catholic family with its own aristocratic connections. He had known Camilla for years, and their families approved of the match enthusiastically. More importantly, Andrew represented safety and acceptance in a world where Camilla was increasingly treated as an outsider. The royal family's relief was evident when news of Camilla and Andrew's engagement reached them in 1973. Charles, still thousands of miles away and unaware of the developments, continued to write letters professing his love and planning their future together. When he finally learned of Camilla's engagement through official channels rather than from her personally, the betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Charles returned to England a changed man. The carefree prince who had left for the Caribbean was replaced by someone more reserved, more guarded, and infinitely more aware of the limitations his birthright placed on his personal happiness. He attended Camilla's wedding to Andrew Parker Bowles on July 4th, 1973, in a small Catholic ceremony that felt more like a funeral to him than a celebration. The wedding was a glittering affair, attended by members of the royal family who smiled and offered congratulations while privately celebrating their victory. Camilla, radiant in her wedding dress, carried herself with the dignity that would become her trademark in difficult situations. But those who knew her well noticed the sadness in her eyes, the forced nature of her smiles, and the way she searched the crowd for a face that remained conspicuously absent during the most important moments. Charles's attendance at the reception was brief and painful. He watched the woman he loved dance with another man, accept congratulations from guests, and play the role of the happy bride with the skill of a trained actress. When their eyes met across the crowded room, the connection was still there, burning as intensely as ever despite the rings on her finger and the vows she had just spoken. The irony was not lost on either of them that their love story was being sacrificed on the altar of royal tradition, the same traditions that would eventually need to bend to accommodate the reality of their enduring connection. As Charles left the reception, he carried with him not just the pain of lost love, but also the first seeds of resentment toward a system that valued bloodlines over genuine human connection. In the years that followed, both Charles and Camilla attempted to build lives with other people. Charles threw himself into his royal duties with renewed vigor, while Camilla focused on her marriage and the children who would soon follow. But their story was far from over. The connection forged in that London club in 1970 had merely gone underground, waiting for the right moment to resurface and challenge the very foundations of royal tradition. The royal family believed they had solved their problem by separating Charles and Camilla, but they had actually created a much larger one. They had turned a simple love story into a forbidden romance, and in doing so, they had guaranteed that it would become the defining narrative of Charles's life and reign. The seeds of future conflict had been planted, and they would soon grow into a crisis that would shake the monarchy to its very core. As 1973 drew to a close, the palace congratulated itself on averting what they saw as a potential disaster. They had protected the bloodline, maintained tradition, and ensured that the future king would eventually make a more suitable match. They had no way of knowing that their victory was temporary, and that the real battle for Charles's heart was just beginning. The mid-1970s brought an uneasy peace to the royal family, but beneath the surface, emotions continued to simmer like a pot about to boil over. Charles threw himself into his royal duties with the dedication of a man trying to forget, but Camilla's memory haunted every official function, every state dinner, and every moment when he was forced to smile for cameras while his heart remained elsewhere. Camilla, now Mrs. Parker Bowles, settled into married life with the grace expected of someone from her background. She gave birth to two children, Tom in 1974 and Laura in 1978, and appeared to embrace her role as a military wife and mother. To the outside world, she seemed perfectly content with her new life, attending charity events, managing her household, and supporting her husband's career with the efficiency of a woman born to the task. But those closest to both Charles and Camilla began to notice subtle signs that their story was far from over. At social gatherings where both were present, the air seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. They maintained careful distance, speaking politely when necessary, but their body language told a different story. Friends noticed how Charles's mood would shift when Camilla entered a room, how he became more animated, more alive, despite his efforts to appear indifferent. The royal family's attempts to find Charles a suitable bride intensified during this period. A parade of eligible young women was introduced to him at various functions, each one carefully vetted for appropriate breeding, temperament, and ability to fulfill the role of future queen. Charles went through the motions, attending dinners and social events with these potential partners, but his heart remained stubbornly uncooperative. One particularly uncomfortable evening at Windsor Castle illustrated the growing tension within the royal family. Charles had been invited to dine with a young aristocrat whom the Queen Mother particularly favored as a potential daughter-in-law. The woman was beautiful, well-educated, and from an impeccable family, yet Charles spent the entire evening distracted and morose. When asked about his obvious discomfort later, he reportedly told a friend that he felt like he was betraying not just himself, but someone else who deserved better. Meanwhile, Camilla was fighting her own battles with the constraints of her marriage. Andrew Parker Bowles, while charming and successful, had never inspired in her the deep passion she had felt for Charles. Their marriage was built on mutual respect and social compatibility rather than overwhelming love. Friends described it as a partnership that worked well on paper, but lacked the emotional depth that Camilla craved. The situation became more complicated when Charles and Camilla began to move in overlapping social circles again. The British upper class was smaller than it appeared, and complete avoidance proved impossible. They found themselves at the same hunting parties, charity functions, and country house weekends, forced to maintain a facade of casual acquaintance while their old feelings burned beneath the surface. It was during one such gathering in 1977 that their careful barriers finally began to crumble. The occasion was a celebration for the Queen's Silver Jubilee at a private estate in Scotland. Charles had attended reluctantly, fulfilling a social obligation, while Camilla was there with Andrew as part of their social circle. The evening began formally enough, with everyone maintaining appropriate distances and conversations. But as the night wore on and the guests relaxed, Charles and Camilla found themselves alone on a terrace overlooking the Scottish Highlands. The conversation started innocuously enough, discussing mutual friends and safe topics. But gradually, the walls they had built around their emotions began to crack. They talked about their children, their respective lives, and carefully avoided mentioning the elephant in the room, their enduring feelings for each other. That night marked the beginning of what would become a secret relationship that would last for decades. They began with innocent meetings, chance encounters that gradually became more planned. Charles would find reasons to visit areas where Camilla lived, often using official duties as cover for personal visits. Camilla, in turn, began appearing at events she knew Charles would attend, always with plausible explanations for her presence. Their renewed relationship was conducted with the skill of trained spies. They developed codes for communication, used trusted friends as intermediaries, and became experts at public deception. To observers, they appeared to be casual acquaintances who moved in similar social circles. The reality was far more complex and dangerous. The royal protection officers assigned to Charles began to notice patterns in his behavior. Unexpected detours during official travel, private meetings that weren't on his official schedule, and phone calls made from secure locations all suggested that the prince was conducting some kind of secret activity. The palace staff who had served the royal family for decades recognized the signs of a clandestine romance, but loyalty and discretion kept them silent. Camilla's household staff also became unwitting accomplices in the deception. Unexpected visits from old friends, mysterious phone calls, and their employers' improved mood after certain social events all pointed to something significant happening in her personal life. The servants who had watched Camilla's marriage with growing concern began to see glimpses of the vibrant woman she had been before duty and expectation had dimmed her spirit. The pressure of maintaining this double life began to take its toll on both of them. Charles became increasingly moody and difficult during official functions, especially those where he was expected to show interest in potential brides. His staff learned to recognize the warning signs of his frustration and developed strategies for managing his increasingly unpredictable temperament. For Camilla, the situation was equally challenging but required different skills. She had to maintain the appearance of a devoted wife and mother while nurturing feelings that threatened to overwhelm her carefully constructed life. Friend described her during this period as someone walking a tightrope, always one misstep away from disaster. The royal family remained largely unaware of the resumed relationship during its early stages. They were focused on other matters, including mounting pressure for Charles to find a suitable wife and begin producing heirs. The Queen's advisors had compiled extensive lists of eligible candidates, and there was growing impatience with Charles's apparent reluctance to settle down. It was Princess Margaret, Charles's aunt, who first suspected that something was amiss. Known for her own unconventional romantic history, Margaret had a keen eye for the signs of secret relationships. She noticed Charles's improved demeanor at certain social functions and began to piece together the puzzle of his mysterious good moods. Margaret's discovery created the first crack in the palace's carefully maintained ignorance about Charles and Camilla's renewed relationship. She initially kept her suspicions to herself, perhaps sympathizing with Charles's situation given her own experiences with forbidden love. But, as the evidence mounted, she found herself in the difficult position of deciding whether her loyalty lay with her nephew's happiness or the institution's stability. The turning point came in late 1978 when a society photographer captured Charles and Camilla at a private gathering, standing closer together than casual acquaintances should. The photograph was never published, but its existence sent shockwaves through certain circles. Suddenly, people who had dismissed rumors about their relationship began to pay closer attention to their interactions. The photograph found its way to senior palace officials through channels that remain unclear to this day. When confronted with evidence of his renewed relationship with Camilla, Charles found himself facing a crisis that would define his approach to love and duty for the rest of his life. The careful balance he had maintained between his personal desires and royal obligations was about to be tested in ways he had never imagined. The palace's response was swift and decisive. Charles was summoned to a private meeting with senior family members and advisors, where he was presented with an ultimatum that would change everything. He could continue his relationship with Camilla and face the consequences, or he could end it permanently and focus on finding a suitable wife. The message was clear. His personal happiness was secondary to his royal duty, and the institution would not tolerate any threat to its stability. As 1978 drew to a close, both Charles and Camilla found themselves facing impossible choices. Their secret relationship had been discovered, and the pressure to end it was mounting from all sides. But their connection had only grown stronger during their years apart and their careful reunion. They stood at a crossroads that would determine not just their personal futures, but the future of the British monarchy itself. The year 1979 marked the beginning of what would become the most complex and painful chapter in Charles and Camilla's story. Under immense pressure from the royal family, Charles had reluctantly agreed to distance himself from Camilla and begin seriously considering marriage to an appropriate candidate. The palace machinery swung into action with military precision, determined to find a bride who would capture public imagination while serving the institution's needs. It was during this desperate search that Lady Diana Spencer entered the picture like a character from a fairy tale. Young, beautiful, and from an aristocratic family with close ties to the royals, Diana seemed to be the perfect solution to Charles's marriage problem. At 19, she was innocent enough to be molded into the ideal royal wife, yet sophisticated enough to handle the pressures of public life. Most importantly, she was everything Camilla was not. Young where Camilla was mature, inexperienced where Camilla was worldly, and blissfully unaware of Charles's emotional entanglements. The courtship of Charles and Diana was choreographed with the precision of a state ceremony. Every public appearance was carefully planned to create maximum positive impact. Every photograph designed to sell the narrative of a perfect royal romance. The British public, hungry for a real-life fairy tale after years of economic difficulties and social unrest, embraced the story with enthusiasm that surprised even the palace's most optimistic advisors. But behind the scenes, a different drama was unfolding. Charles found himself trapped between duty and desire, forced to court a woman he barely knew while his heart remained with someone he was forbidden to see. The strain of maintaining this charade began to show in subtle ways. His jokes became more sardonic, his public appearances more mechanical, and his private moments more melancholy. Camilla, meanwhile, watched the Diana phenomenon unfold with a mixture of heartbreak and resigned acceptance. She understood better than anyone that Charles was being forced into a role he didn't want, but she also recognized that fighting the inevitable would only cause more pain for everyone involved. Friends described her, during this period, as a woman in mourning, grieving for a love that was being buried alive rather than allowed to die naturally. The most devastating blow came when Charles asked Camilla to help him choose a wedding gift for Diana. The request, made during a secret meeting in early 1981, revealed the depth of Charles's emotional confusion and his desperate need for Camilla's guidance, even as he prepared to marry another woman. Camilla agreed to help, demonstrating a grace under pressure that would become her trademark in the years to come. The wedding gift became symbolic of everything wrong with the situation. Charles wanted to give Diana something meaningful, but he had no real understanding of her tastes or preferences. Camilla, who knew Charles better than anyone, found herself in the impossible position of helping the man she loved choose a gift for his bride-to-be. The irony was painful for both of them, yet they went through the motions with the dignity expected of their social class. The royal wedding on July 29, 1981, was watched by an estimated 750 million people worldwide, making it one of the most viewed events in television history. The pageantry was magnificent, Diana looked radiant, and Charles played his part perfectly. But those who knew the real story could see the sadness behind his smiles and the mechanical nature of his responses during the ceremony. Camilla attended the wedding as Mrs. Parker Bowles, sitting with other family friends and maintaining the perfect facade of a well-wisher celebrating a joyous occasion. Photographers captured her applauding politely and smiling at appropriate moments, but those images would later be scrutinized for signs of the pain she must have felt watching the man she loved pledge his life to someone else. The honeymoon period that followed was a public relations triumph for the royal family. Images of the happy couple on their Mediterranean cruise and later at Balmoral Castle painted a picture of wedded bliss that satisfied public expectations. But the reality was far more complicated, as Diana began to discover that she had married a man whose heart belonged to another woman. Diana's awakening to the truth about Charles and Camilla was gradual and devastating. It began with small inconsistencies in Charles's behavior, mysterious phone calls, unexplained absences, and emotional distance that seemed to grow rather than diminish as their marriage progressed. Diana, despite her youth and inexperience, possessed an intuitive intelligence that allowed her to piece together the puzzle of her husband's divided loyalties. The first major confrontation came just months after the wedding, when Diana discovered photographs of Camilla among Charles's personal possessions. When she questioned him about them, Charles's evasive responses only confirmed her worst suspicions. The fairy tale marriage that had captivated the world was already showing cracks that would eventually destroy it completely. Meanwhile, the pressure of maintaining his public role while denying his private feelings was taking a severe toll on Charles. He threw himself into his royal duties with renewed intensity, perhaps hoping that constant activity would distract him from his personal misery. But his staff noticed that he was becoming increasingly difficult to work with, prone to sudden outbursts of anger and periods of deep depression. Camilla's situation was equally challenging in different ways. Her marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles had become increasingly strained as rumors about her relationship with Charles continued to circulate in society circles. Andrew, a man of the world who understood the realities of aristocratic marriages, had initially been tolerant of the situation. But the public nature of the speculation was beginning to affect his own career and social standing. The birth of Prince William in June 1982 temporarily shifted attention away from the growing problems in Charles and Diana's marriage. The arrival of a new heir was celebrated throughout the Commonwealth, and Diana's obvious joy in motherhood endeared her even more to the public. For a brief period, it seemed possible that parenthood might provide the common ground that could save their marriage. But even this happy event carried complications for Charles and Camilla. Charles's genuine delight in his son was overshadowed by his awareness that William represented yet another chain binding him to a life he hadn't chosen. He loved his child deeply, but fatherhood also meant that any future change in his personal circumstances would have far-reaching consequences for an innocent boy who had done nothing to deserve such complications. Camilla's response to William's birth was characteristically complex. She genuinely celebrated Charles's happiness in becoming a father, but she also understood that the child made her own situation even more impossible. Any hope of a future with Charles had to be balanced against the reality that he was now a father with responsibilities that extended far beyond his personal desires. The public during this period remained largely unaware of the underlying tensions. The media coverage focused on the success of the royal marriage and the promise of a new generation of royals. Diana's popularity continued to soar, and her fashion choices and public appearances generated the kind of positive publicity that the palace craved. From the outside, everything appeared to be proceeding according to plan. But insiders began to notice troubling signs. Diana's behavior became increasingly erratic, swinging between periods of intense activity and deep withdrawal. Charles became more isolated, spending long hours alone and showing less interest in the social activities that had once given him pleasure. The couple's public appearances together became more stilted and formal, lacking the warmth that had characterized their early days together. The situation reached a crisis point in 1984 when Diana confronted Camilla directly at a social function. The encounter, witnessed by several other guests, was brief but electric with tension. Diana's youth and emotional volatility clashed with Camilla's mature composure, creating a scene that those present would never forget. The confrontation was kept out of the press, but it marked a turning point in the complex triangle that was destroying 3 lives. Following this encounter, the palace implemented strict protocols designed to keep Diana and Camilla apart at social functions. The logistics of managing this separation became increasingly complex as both women moved in the same circles and had legitimate reasons to attend the same events. The royal protection officers found themselves managing not just physical security, but emotional security as well. Charles's response to the growing crisis was to retreat further into his royal duties and personal interests. He threw himself into his charitable work, his architectural projects, and his environmental causes with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Friends described him as a man running from his own life, using constant activity to avoid confronting the impossibility of his situation. The media, meanwhile, continued to portray the royal marriage as a success story, but cracks were beginning to show in their coverage. Society journalists began to notice that Charles and Diana were rarely photographed together at private social events, and their body language during public appearances became the subject of increasing scrutiny. The fairy tale narrative was becoming harder to maintain in the face of mounting evidence that all was not well in the House of Windsor. As 1984 drew to a close, all three principals in this drama found themselves trapped in roles they couldn't escape. Charles was bound by duty to a marriage that brought him no happiness. Diana was beginning to understand that she had been used as a pawn in a larger game, and Camilla was forced to watch from the sidelines as the man she loved suffered in silence. The stage was being set for revelations that would shake the monarchy to its foundations and transform all their lives forever. The late 1980s brought a series of events that would ultimately transform the British monarchy and vindicate Camilla's decades-long wait for acceptance. The carefully maintained fiction of Charles and Diana's happy marriage was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain as both partners began to live essentially separate lives while maintaining public appearances together. Diana, now a confident and charismatic public figure in her own right, had grown tired of pretending that her marriage was anything other than an elaborate charade. Her popularity with the public had reached unprecedented levels, and she began to use that popularity as leverage against the institution that had placed her in an impossible situation. Her humanitarian work, particularly with AIDS patients and landmine victims, had given her a platform that rivaled Charles's in influence and far exceeded his in public affection. The pressure finally erupted in 1992, the year the Queen would later describe as her annus horribilis. The publication of Andrew Morton's book Diana, Her True Story, revealed the depth of Diana's unhappiness and her husband's continued relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. For the first time, the public learned the truth about the love triangle that had been hidden behind palace walls for more than 20 years. The revelations sent shockwaves through British society and beyond. The fairy tale marriage that had captivated the world was exposed as a carefully orchestrated deception, and the public felt betrayed by the institution they had been taught to revere. Diana's admission of her own extramarital relationships and her struggles with bulimia and depression created sympathy for her situation while casting Charles and Camilla as villains in a story that had no clear heroes. Camilla found herself thrust into an unwanted spotlight that transformed her from a private individual into a public figure overnight. Photographers camped outside her home. Reporters investigated every aspect of her past, and she became the target of public anger from Diana supporters who saw her as the destroyer of a fairy tale marriage. The woman who had conducted herself with dignity and discretion for more than 20 years suddenly found herself portrayed as a homewrecker and manipulator. The palace's response to the crisis was characteristically defensive and ineffective. Official statements denied the allegations while simultaneously refusing to address the specific claims, creating an impression of guilt by evasion. The royal family's traditional strategy of maintaining silence while weathering public storms proved inadequate for a media age that demanded immediate and comprehensive responses to breaking news. Charles's position became increasingly untenable as public support for Diana reached fever pitch. His own attempts to explain his side of the story, including his famous admission of adultery in a 1994 television interview, only served to confirm what many already suspected while failing to generate the sympathy he had hoped for. The future king found himself in the unprecedented position of being less popular than his estranged wife and significantly less beloved than his own mother. The divorce proceedings that began in 1995 were conducted under intense media scrutiny that transformed every legal maneuver into front-page news. Diana's negotiating position was strengthened by her public popularity and her obvious willingness to reveal more embarrassing details if the settlement was not to her liking. The royal family, faced with the prospect of even more damaging revelations, ultimately agreed to terms that were far more generous than they had initially intended to offer. Camilla's divorce from Andrew Parker Bowles in 1995 removed one barrier to her eventual acceptance by the royal family, but it also intensified public speculation about her future with Charles. The timing of the divorce, coming so soon after Charles and Diana's separation became official, was seen by many as confirmation that Camilla and Charles were planning a future together regardless of public opinion. The lowest point in Camilla's public life came with Diana's death in August 1997. The outpouring of grief for the people's princess was accompanied by renewed anger toward the woman many blamed for her unhappiness. Camilla was advised not to attend Diana's funeral, a decision that was both practically necessary for her safety and symbolically important for the royal family's attempt to honor Diana's memory. But Diana's death also marked a turning point in public attitudes toward Charles and Camilla's relationship. The initial anger gradually gave way to a more nuanced understanding of the complex circumstances that had led to the tragedy. Charles's obvious grief at Diana's death and his dedication to their sons began to rehabilitate his public image, while Camilla's continued low profile and dignified silence gradually reduced the hostility directed toward her. The strategy of patient rehabilitation began in earnest in 1999 when Charles and Camilla made their first official public appearance together at a charity function. The event was carefully chosen and meticulously planned, with extensive security measures to protect them from potential protests. The couple's nervous but dignified appearance together marked the beginning of a long campaign to normalize their relationship in the public mind. Queen Elizabeth's attitude toward Camilla began to soften during this period, influenced by Charles's obvious happiness when he was with her and the stability she brought to his life. The Queen, now in her 70s and increasingly concerned about the succession, began to see Camilla as a solution to her son's personal problems rather than a threat to the institution. This shift in royal opinion was crucial to Camilla's eventual acceptance. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, provided an unexpected opportunity for Camilla to demonstrate her suitability for royal life. Her composed response to the crisis and her support for Charles during this difficult period impressed palace officials who had previously been skeptical of her character. Her ability to provide stability and strength during times of crisis began to be seen as valuable assets rather than mere personal qualities. The gradual rehabilitation process accelerated after the Queen Mother's death in 2002. The Queen Mother had been one of Camilla's most implacable opponents, viewing her as a threat to royal tradition and propriety. Her death removed a significant obstacle to Camilla's eventual acceptance, while also forcing the royal family to confront questions about succession and the future of the monarchy. Charles's 50th birthday celebration in 1998 had provided the first glimpse of what acceptance might look like. Camilla attended the party as an official guest, marking the first time she had been publicly acknowledged as an important part of Charles's life. The event passed without major incident, suggesting that public opposition to their relationship was beginning to weaken. The engagement announcement on February 10, 2005, came after years of careful preparation and public diplomacy. The couple's obvious happiness together, combined with their mature approach to their relationship, helped to generate cautiously positive public reaction. The decision to have a civil ceremony rather than a church wedding acknowledged the complications of their situation while still treating their union as officially significant. The wedding itself, on April 9, 2005, at Windsor Guildhall, was a carefully orchestrated event that balanced the need for official recognition with sensitivity to public opinion. The Queen's attendance at the blessing ceremony, though not at the civil service itself, provided the royal stamp of approval that transformed Camilla from an unwelcome outsider into an official member of the royal family. Camilla's transformation from Duchess of Cornwall to Queen Consort represented the final victory in her long struggle for acceptance. Her dignified conduct during the years of public hostility, combined with her obvious positive influence on Charles's happiness and effectiveness, gradually won over even many of her former critics. The woman who had once been denied entry to royal events was now preparing to be crowned alongside the man she had loved for more than 50 years. The irony of Camilla's journey was not lost on those who had witnessed her decades-long struggle. The same institution that had once viewed her as an existential threat had ultimately embraced her as essential to its future stability. Her patience and dignity during the years of exile had proven to be more powerful than all the palace's attempts to eliminate her from Charles's life. Charles's accession to the throne in 2022, following his mother's death, represented the final validation of his choice to remain faithful to his love for Camilla despite decades of pressure to abandon her. The new king's obvious contentment and the public's gradual acceptance of Queen Camilla demonstrated that sometimes love can indeed conquer even the most entrenched institutional opposition. The golden gates that had once been barred to Camilla had not only opened, but had welcomed her as their future guardian. Her transformation from unwelcome outsider to queen consort represented more than just a personal victory. It symbolized the monarchy's capacity to evolve and adapt while maintaining its essential character. The woman who had been denied access to royal events was now the custodian of royal tradition, having proven that authentic love and patient dignity could overcome even the most formidable barriers. The fairy tale ending that Diana had been denied ultimately belonged to Camilla, but it came at a cost that no one could have anticipated when their love story began in that London club more than 50 years earlier. The golden gates had opened, but they had revealed a kingdom transformed by the very struggle to keep them closed.